Hello and welcome to the Bout of Insanity podcast. This will be episode 4. It's just dawned on me that I've been doing this for 4 weeks, so the equivalent of a month now, and it really doesn't feel so long. Finally have a purpose in life, I suppose, just rambling on YouTube to a very small number of people. If you were somehow forced to listen to my other podcasts, say by some cult gathering or something, I definitely feel sorry for you, because there's no way you are that dedicated, especially to me, of all people. Like, some better things to listen to or watch, or it's probably more exciting to just stare at a wall. So, if you did, on the off chance, listen to one and you're back for more, I thank you. I am eternally grateful. Now, I think at least one of you will be, well, I hope so anyway. At least one of you listening will be glad that today I'm not planning on covering politics at all. In fact, I'm not even... well, I don't know, does it count as history? I suppose so, technically. Well, it is the study of it. It's a secret at the moment, even though it's in the title, probably. I make up the titles as I go along. But yeah, today is mostly going to be just a casual one, because, you know, waking up on this Monday morning, I thought, you know what, I don't really want to study the inner workings of a political party, or or some constitution, or some other, as the kids would say, deep subject. So I won't be, and after all, it is my podcast. I've had to defend it against many invaders, people trying to take all the fame and glory for themselves, armed uprisings, attempted revolutions, just general things like that, something we've all been through. Now, because I think this episode is going to be quite a short one without it, I am going to allow myself to deviate from that point. I wonder how miserable life in the Middle Ages was. I thought of that because I thought we've all been involved in some revolt in one way or another. So back in the Middle Ages, I think most people had a definite right to riot and to destroy the place and try and overthrow the system, because, you know, feudalism isn't really the most fair system out there. Let's be honest, I mean, capitalism and socialism and liberalism, they all have their faults, but at least it's not all of the peasants pay a much higher tax than the nobles, who pay to the kin, and then the kin just doesn't do anything. At least in capitalist society, there's some state involvement in people's lives, other than sending them off to France to die. And in fact, most soldiers died of disease rather than fighting for most of human conflicts, which is quite ironic, because in a way it's sort of nature taking away people who are doing unnatural things, but really I don't see it as that unnatural. War, I mean, not dysentery. Because my theory is that people are hardwired to live in small family-like groups, to work together to achieve a common goal and to survive. I'm trying not to make this a philosophy podcast, but that's pretty much my idea. It's not backed up by any reasoning, because, why would I? Because I'm most likely wrong, but that's just how I think of it. So eventually nations rose because some people got more and more power and got more and more people under them. Maybe a social contract, as the liberals would say, both classical and modern liberals. Maybe a social contract was signed and said, we will set up a state if you can protect us. And that's probably what happened. Because nations and the state aren't entirely intertwined. Because, for example, there's the Welsh nation and the English nation. By the way, we bloody lost to Italy yesterday. I'm fuming about that. But the English nation and the Welsh nation are under the same state. They're under the British state. So yeah. But yeah, so what I should have said back then is nations didn't rise, but states, well, they both rose. But it's more important in context of war that states became more powerful and eventually they warred with each other instead of small tribes. So, I think it's some part of humans' psychology or what have you, which makes, at least for those in power, want to war with each other, not necessarily the troops on the ground. Would much rather be tending to their sheeps with a tax which will put them in poverty forever. I'm talking about the Middle Ages here, I'm not a communist, allegedly. But what was I saying? Oh yes, the life in Middle Ages, was it really that bad? Because it seems to me that people accepted life. I started reading a book, it was actually the second book to be printed in English, and I say printed, and by that I mean the printing press. So obviously there were handwritten books before, 13 or 12 something. And it was saying how the glory of the people comes from the glory of the king. So the more majestic the royalty is, the more majestic the people are, theoretically. And that this isn't something which a king wrote. Obviously it's an educated man, and one of a high position if he, was able to use a printing press and sell his works and read and everything like that. He was obviously wealthy for his time. But, he's not the nobility either. So, I think that people back then, they just saw it as how things were, and generally they liked it, because it's not until, in England, it's not until about, when was it, 1642 or 1640, where masses of people genuinely rose up against the institution of the monarchy. Because before there were rebellions, obviously, against the king, and assassination attempts on Queen Elizabeth I and everything else. But those people, they either wanted to get rid of the current monarch and put another one on, or they just wanted to change the king's mind, like in Pilgrimage of Grace, where they said, we're not rebelling against the king, we're rebelling against the king's advisors, who are Cromwell and Cranmer, who are bringing in Protestant reform. So most of the time, in the sort of very early modern times, it was against the religion, and then it sort of went into, actually, let's change how this system is governed, let's change it inside out. And there was a poem which actually inspired Tolkien, I don't know how you say it, to write Lord of the Rings, because he was a historian, but particularly a Viking, ancient European historian, and he found this contemporary Norse poem called The Wanderer, and it says how, and in that poem it's about some former soldier or knight, and he tries to find his purpose, and he says that he just wants to, I think one of the lines is he just wanted to kiss his lord's feet. So, serving back in those times was an honourable thing, but now people are a lot more individualistic, they're a lot more sceptical on power and everything else. They want to do their own thing, which is probably for the best, let's be honest, but it just shows how back then people didn't actually hate the system if they were somewhat good at it, somewhat successful. Because, obviously the peasants didn't want to be poor, but they saw the nobility and the royalty as placed on this earth by God, so they just accepted it. And it makes me wonder, maybe one day we'll move out of this era of our rights and our individualism, because I think it was either Mussolini or Vladimir Lenin who said that the truth is people are sick of having rights. So, sort of like how Russia's going, they don't want a democracy, as idiotic as it sounds. They get given a democracy in 1917 and then they immediately overthrow it. The provisional government, can you call it democratic? Maybe not. But then they overthrew it and established the Soviet Union. That fell. They had a corrupt republic for a few years, and now under Putin they're starting to go back to a dictatorship, and most people, I'd say, in Russia at least don't disagree with it. So, in some cultures, in some parts of the world, people like to be ruled. They don't want all of their freedoms. They don't want democracy. And it's sort of the same back then in the ancient and medieval world. Because of course the pyramids weren't built by slaves, which is commonly misinterpreted. They were built by people who built it voluntarily for the pharaoh. A massive monument just for some incest kin to be buried. Buried, sorry. Can't speak today. I mean, you could say it's a waste of time and money, which I'm glad they did spend for time and money, because it's one of the wonders of the world, the Great Pyramids, but would people do that now? No. Obviously not. So, yeah. Just something about medieval life, it sort of calls to me, because a lot of the myths about the medieval world, that people thought the earth was flat, that it's a quote-unquote dark ages, even though Alfred the Great was very knowledgeable and he brought a lot of knowledge and valued it a lot for his kingdom of Sussex, and I think he may have united England. I don't know. I know nothing on Alfred the Great. But this so-called Dark Ages, where people were only leeched. I mean, people were leeched as a medicine, and people did believe in the four humours, but some of their medicines worked. They didn't know why they worked or how. I'd give them that, but there's even some evidence that the common folk might have been able to read, which I'm a bit skeptical on, really, because no, I'm not really skeptical for that, because as how I heard it, they said they only need to learn the alphabet, and you can get a toddler to, with extreme dedication, so I don't believe that peasants were not taught at all how to read. Because why would it be a problem in early Middle Ages England that the royalty and the top 1% only spoke French, and the bottom half, or bottom 99% only spoke English? How is that a problem if they can't converse to each other? Because they, kings wouldn't go out and say, today I want to invade France because it's my kingdom somehow, because William the Conqueror was French, sort of French, and he came and conquered us, therefore England have a right to conquer France. I don't understand that argument, but because I'm English I get to ignore it. So, they would have to write some things between the classes, and they couldn't, so eventually the royalty had to switch and start speaking English. So, yeah, but one thing I am skeptical on is that there was a general atheism among the public, because, alright, you can make the claim, well, people won't be so religious as the nobility and the royalty, because it's very important for the royals, really, because they're the ones being told you were put on this earth by divine judgment, and it's the divine right of kings that you rule. Maybe if you're some farmer from Southampton, you're not really going to believe that everything was created for some purpose. But I disagree. I'd say, well, if you look at what happens when Henry VIII breaks from Rome, you get the Pilgrimage of Grace, which I think 300,000 people started marching towards London. I mean, it was peaceful, sort of. Henry VIII didn't do much to decrease those tensions, and then he executed a load for no reason later on. I think it was in 1536. Yeah. And how did the original riot start? It was because of a rumour that the government would knock down a massive spire in Lincoln. So, you know, when there's a rumour going around that your tall spire is going to get knocked down, then half the country decides to march on London. That's not really showing many signs of atheism, and this is much later. Well, not necessarily much later, depending on where you go, but this is the early modern period. This is the Renaissance. Like, imagine back in the Middle Ages. And then I remember seeing something of an Alfred the Great, one of his battles against the Vikings, and the source said, well, the what are they called? Bloody Wessexians? I don't know, but they won the battle by divine intervention. Like, people were religious. Like, I do not believe for 1 second that there was a general atheism. I'm sure there were, privately, of course, a few, but I don't know, if people can struggle to be an atheist in a lot of the parts of the world now, and religion is still very powerful, it must have been powerful back in ye olde times, because, you know, the church owned a third of the whole land of England. Let's not forget that. At the start of Henry VIII's reign. So, yeah, and I think 22 minutes. God. Okay, maybe this won't be a very long episode. Now, I mean, will be a very long episode. Now, what else? Should I do that? I guess I should, before it becomes very old news. The return of Garry Kasparov in the Grand Chess Tour, which this year will be, or is, taking place in Croatia. Kasparov was world champion and considered to be the greatest of all time, the GOAT, as the youths say, for 2 decades. So it was definitely a big moment as he returned. Not sure why, maybe he just wanted to play another tournament, just for fun. But it didn't really go well for him. He lost 7 games he didn't win one. He drew 1 in round 1. So, pretty dismal for a former world champion, especially when Vishwanathan Anand, another former world champion from India, won a few and got 2nd place in one of the Blitz tournaments. So far, that is. But, yeah, in one of them he resigned in the 7 moves. That was against Mamedov. I don't know how you say it. But 7 moves in, and he resigned. So, I believe he was playing with the black pieces. So, slightly understandable. But come on. That's not really a good show. And then, leading the tournament so far is Nepomniachtchi, who is the world champion contender, which will be taking place this year, end of this year. Though it is important to note that Magnus Carlsen, the current world champion, isn't in the World Chess Tour for some reason. I'm not sure why. Maybe he wants to study more and more in preparation for the championship, which again is understandable. But yeah, I think I've done enough on bloody chess, so what else? Oh yeah, the main thing which I thought of. In Norse mythology, are dark elves, Dwarves, and dwarves the same? Are they the same? Because there's a theory that they are actually the same creature. Now, I think you probably have a lot more knowledge on it than me, because I'm very rudimentary in my in my understanding and general knowledge of Norse mythology. But you know, Yggdrasil, is that how it, what? Yggdrasil, okay, Yggdrasil. Yes, perfect start for bloody world tree, and it's got all 9 worlds. Oh god, I forgot to write down all of them. But there's bloody Midgard, there's Niflheim, there's Alfheim, and there's... Wait, what's the main one which I will be talking about? Svartalfheim. That's it. Svartalfheim. I tried to find in it. And there's... Oh, Asgard as well. I can't forget Asgard. It's the main one. I got, 4 out of 9. So if I wanted to, I could doodle it, but it messes my mic up somehow. It doesn't really like it when I talk. It just gets all... type. Sorry, it gets all bass boosted for a few seconds. So anyway, so there's bloody Midgard in the middle, I suppose. Then Alfheim, where the light elves go. Alf is elf. And wait, got another word I have to pronounce. Leifsalfa? Lossalfa. Let's see. How do I actually pronounce that? Sorry if I forget to cut this out and there's a load of bass boosts. Lossalfa. Yes, thank you. Forvo.com. Very much appreciated. So, Lossalfa. They live in Alfheim, and that's generally thought to be up above Earth, so it's in the sky. And then Svartalfheim. How have I forgotten the name already? Bloody hell. Svartalfheim, which is where the Dark Elves live. Dothalfa. That's generally thought to be underground, which is why we don't know if them having skin blacker than pitch means, are they naturally black or are they dirtied? And that's not racist, alright? Before bloody in 7 years' time when this gets found and for some reason people decide to listen to this and go, wow, he's a racist, we need to cancel him. Alright? They don't mean bloody brown skin or bloody African skin. They mean pitch black skin, darker than pitch skin. So yes, go away with your allegations. Anyway. Yeah, so we don't know if they just have dirty skin or they are genuinely black. And I don't think they're necessarily evil. I mean, they do a lot of good things for the gods, which I will get onto in a moment because it's quite important. But first of all, I should say that Dark Elves and Light Elves might not have even existed in contemporary Norse mythology, because I don't think there's been any contemporary sources found where they're actually describing them explicitly. So maybe they don't even exist in Norse mythology, we don't know. But in some of the very close to it descriptions, the term Dottelfa and the one for dwarf are pretty much synonymous, and the dwarves live in Svartalheim as well. So, and yes, the gods go to Svartalheim to get the dwarves to cast the chains for Fenrir, the son of Loki, who was a massive bloody wolf. You don't want him going around. Until Ragnarok, I remember they said, yeah, he can get set free now. Now it's alright. Yeah, right when we don't want him, right when we absolutely do not want him to be set free, we might as well let him set free. But yeah, they go down to Svartalheim and they asked, can you make some chain out of fish breath and cat footsteps and some other stuff, I don't know. And in some of the recounts of that story, the Dark Elves make the chains. So, some evidence to suggest that they're actually very similar, if not the same creature. And also when Loki found Sif, the goddess of the harvest and hair, because she had beautiful golden hair, he lopped it off to do a little trolling, as they say. And because he thought, Thor loves her hair, so I'm gonna cut it off because I'm, evil. And then shaved her bald while she was sleeping. Like, bloody hell. He is some evil god. And he created bloody Fenrir as well. I don't know why he's seen as some neutral character, like a bloody poltergeist. He's an evil bastard. Then Sif wakes up and she's because she doesn't have her hair anymore. And then what do the gods do? They go down to Svartalheim and they get Dark Elves / Dwarves to make her some more hair out of actual gold, which still grows like normal hair. So hurrah! The day's saved by the mysterious creatures who may not even exist in the lore. Do I have any more points? Because I was talking about for a good 20 seconds. The whole thing. Well, I suppose I could just generally speak my thoughts on it. I think it's very likely that they could be the same creature, because although the dwarves have a creation myth which is quite different to Dark Elf creation myths, if there is any, I couldn't really find much detail on it. I mean, yeah, is it likely that they're the same creature or intended to be? Probably not. Because, let's not forget, well, there's some evidence that peasants and the common folk couldn't read, is that most of this time stories were written in songs. So like an unsung hero is a hero who isn't sung about, and is the unwritten hero. Maybe some people do, I don't know. But people were told of stories by song or by speaking the tales. Like how the Iliad, it had to be memorized by the people doing it there, and they had some stick which they would beat against something, sort of like a metronome, to keep a beat through the story. So there was just someone there just talking through the Iliad in a rhythm. It wasn't actually people reading it like as if it's a book. So, and that of course means that unless if it has to be memorized and has to be absolutely perfect, the tales will change for every different person. Because, don't know, maybe someone back in when they were recounting the tales, they got Dark Elf and Dwarf confused, and then they, ever since, that they were just synonymous. Because maybe the people writing the myths didn't actually want them to be seen as the same creature, but then they sort of didn't put enough difference between them, so they eventually glided towards each other. So who knows? Maybe this myth that they are different, maybe it's true, maybe the myth that they're the same as the real myth. But we most likely will never know for sure. It's mostly down to luck, whether you're right or wrong, when it comes to ancient details. Like how we don't even know if the Trojan War ever happened. Because I always think of it like, the Trojan horse, how big is it? Because surely you could, at absolute most, like keep, I don't know, like, how big is a legion? I'd say a legion is probably about, what, like 100 people? I don't know. But at most you could fit about 100 people in a Trojan horse before people got suspicious. And it would then have to be an absolutely humongous horse. Humongous horse. And of course it would be heavier if there's a load of men in with bloody metal armour and metal swords and spears and shields. So, and then those men just took over the whole city of Troy. I'm not really convinced that story is 100% historically accurate. But then again, there's that story which did happen of some... no, not Celts, of just clans. Yeah, the clan, that's what I'm thinking of. In Scotland. And I think it's, what is it, the Red Wedding or the Blue, I don't know, in Game of Thrones. I think that's what inspired it. And, or the event inspired the Game of Thrones thing, sorry. And so the clan, one enemy clan, or not necessarily enemy, rival clan, was there, and then they get a load of people seeking refuge, and you can tell they're very tired, very hungry. So then they go, okay, we'll let you in to rest, and then in the night, it turns out that those refugees were actually their rival clan, and they would get up and just murder everyone in the buildings. So, pretty horrid stuff. And was it the Glencoe massacre? Let's see. Glencoe massacre. Oh no, it was government forces. Lol. 1692. So the clan of MacDonald got massacred. Sometimes as I was somewhat talking about earlier, I somewhat feel a sense of loss when it comes to very old traditions of each nation, like Irish culture and the Irish language and Cornish and Scottish and the bloody English Celts as well. Let's not forget them. Just because we were conquered by the bloody Romans doesn't mean that we're all Latin tards. I just made that up on the spot. England might not be considered a Celtic nation, but that's only because we were wiped out. Come on, give us some slack. But yes, things like that, and not even mentioning the bloody Native Americans, Native Australians, Native Canadians, Native Africans. Like all of their languages, all of their history, all of their battles and heroes, and great leaders of antiquity. They're mostly gone. I don't know of a single war between two Native American tribes from hundreds and hundreds of years ago. We only know. And it's a shame because when people think of Native American, they think of their oppression. They don't think of their vast cultures. Or if they do, it's a shame how those vast, perfect cultures were destroyed by European barbarians. Yes, they were destroyed, but they weren't perfect. They were just as fallible and just as warlike as any other nation at the time. Doesn't deserve to mean they should be colonized for it and murdered and get their land stolen. But, I'm sure there were some really epic Native American tribal wars. I can just imagine them. It's never coming back. Like the Viking age. Like people, random sailors from Denmark going over to what was then the New World and just plundering everything. And then going back home. But we'll never come back. Absolute monarchies and all of that, although I'm glad they won't come back, they will never do. Empires won't come back, and in a way I feel it's some sort of loss from it. I don't necessarily like any of those things. I certainly wouldn't want them to come back, but life goes on, civilization moves forward, and eventually more and more things will get lost to time and forgotten about, and epic mythology and epic battles and heroes and kings and queens and leaders and presidents, but they will all be forgotten to the history books. Like, we only talk about Norse mythology 1,000 years later because it was so expansive and the Vikings were so cool. Like, if they were, like, do we know much on Celtic tribes? If we do, it's very bare, and then we don't know what they were called or necessarily their borders and their specific cultures. Like, I remember watching something and they said, maybe King Arthur wasn't a Roman. Maybe he wasn't a Saxon. What if he was some Celt leader who wasn't recorded and was only spread by word of mouth as Arthur? And we don't know. We will never know if Robin Hood or King Arthur or the Trojan Wars happened. We will never know for sure, and it's sort of sad because only 1% of ancient literature still survives today. And what remains of it is absolutely fascinating, obviously, because people know about it today. People know of the Iliad, even though the Library of Alexandria burned down. Most of the scrolls in there was talking about the Iliad. Like, all of those cultures, all of those histories, all of those nations, they will eventually fade out of existence. And yeah, I'm not a sort of super conservative who wants to return to a English for the English sort of thing and get the immigrants out and everything like that, but it's strange thinking about history, and one day, everyone listening here, eventually they will be forgotten about. We will rot, eventually our skeletons will disappear, maybe leave a fossil if you're lucky for people hundreds of thousands years later, God knows what they'll look like, or if they'll be the same species. I don't know, can't tell you that, can I? I'm not some bloody the end is nigh person and predict an alien invasion. I think it's more likely that another species will evolve into us, because humans seem to be very much OP, as gamers would say. But where was I? Oh yes, existential dread. We will be forgotten. Every one of us, unless if, on the off chance, one of you listening will become Prime Minister, or President, or some amazing war general, or a celebrity. We will be sent to a grave, and after a few generations, all which will remain as our name, a few generations after that, it's, oh, they have the same name as me, I wonder if surname as me, I wonder if they're related to me. That's if your surname survives. And then a few hundred years ago, no one has any clue who you are. Like when people find some skeleton of a caveman, like, the chances are a good number of people are related to him or her, and people will never know. So yes, enough of, I don't know, is that considered depressing? I don't necessarily think it is. It's just how things are. Things have always been like that, and they always will be. Not everybody can be remembered, and maybe nobody will. Maybe one day Alexander the Great will be completely faded into obscurity and no one's even heard of him. Maybe one day people will forget about Egypt as a country and like Babylon or something, where they only know the name, don't know anything about the empire or its geography, like I don't. I haven't really looked into the Babylonian history. And how there seems to be a lot of defined eras. How there's the medieval era, and it sort of ends around late 1400s, early 1500s, and it goes into the Renaissance, and then the Enlightenment, and then the modern era, and in the Industrial Revolution. So yeah, it's technology and politics drives civilizations forward. But that's not always a good thing, especially if you're colonized by so-called civilized peoples. But anyway, 52 minutes long. I tried to make this episode a little shorter, and it may be my second longest ever. So, if you've listened this far, I thank you. Oh, and in my existential dread speech, I never once brought up hell, the idea of heaven or hell, and I think that's a success in my books. So, thank you for listening. This has been the Bout of Insanity podcast. I will see you approximately next week, hopefully. Goodbye.